Today's topic is one that LightBox has been closely following over the past few years, and that is the industry's ongoing adoption of the ASTM 1521 standard. I've been in the industry long enough to know that it's always a big deal when a new standard practice comes out because it really has implications for the important work that EPs are doing in the field every day. So before we start, I want to just lay out a time frame for adoption of the ASTM E1527 standard. It was published in November 2021 after years of hard work by the task group. And after that, the federal EPA conducted its review of the new standard. And in March 2022, EPA issued a proposed rule that recognized the 21 standard as AEI compliant and opened up the requisite comment period. And then this past December, EPA issued its direct final rule, which responded to the public comments that came in, and it officially recognized that property purchasers could use the 21 standard to satisfy all appropriate inquiries for establishing a CERCLA defense. They assigned an effective date of February 13th of this year, but what they essentially did was give a one-year grandfather clause for transitioning over from the 13 standard to 21. So as of February 13th, 2024, the 13 standard will no longer be recognized by EPA as an avenue for satisfying all appropriate inquiry. Our last survey of environmental consultants was in September of last year. And at that time, the results showed that while 31% were following the new standard exclusively, there were still 28% who were waiting for EPA to recognize the new standard as an avenue for AEI compliance under CERCLA. So that's also what we heard at our November webinar with Phase I report reviewers. The reports they were seeing were either a mix. Some had already adapted fully to the new standard, and their reports referenced it. Others were referencing both standards, and still others were referencing only the 13 version, which brings me to today's topic. We're kind of at this in-between place in its transition. And in the context of the time frame that EPA laid out, which I just summarized, the decisions that consultants are making about which standard their reports are conducted in compliance with have implications that we think are worth bringing to the surface. So I'm fortunate to be here with my colleague, Alan Agadoni, who prior to coming on board at LightBox was an EP out of Atlanta. So he's seen a share of transitions over to new ASTM standards. So Alan, thank you for being here. And let me start by asking you to think back to your past life as a consultant where you managed a large ESA practice, you had responsibility for hundreds of assessors who were conducting thousands of Phase I ESA reports annually. So, what was your mindset on adopting the most current standard? And, did you adopt early? Did you wait for the majority to adopt it? Or did you wait until the old standard was essentially no longer considered best practice?
Good question, Diane. Thanks. It's been many generations of the ASTM standard for me, and putting aside the differences between each of those revisions, I think there was some common factors there that I had to balance, and that was mostly involving the potential risk of using the prior standard versus the newly revised standard, especially during this kind of time frame where we're kind of in a transition period. The main factors I had in my mindset were market acceptance. Were clients ready? Were clients informed? Did they care? Getting a gauge on that, and then also making sure that operationally my team and my company were ready to go. And then it was kind of a balancing act of doing it as soon as possible once I was prepared. And I like you said, I totally understand the reluctance of some people to adopt a new standard immediately upon its publishing, but it's been over a year now. And I understand there's a lot to do each time. You got to educate yourself and your team and your clients on what the revisions are, how they might impact the reports that they receive and those kinds of things, how to implement and do the best job with the new standard. You've got to update your report templates. And in my case, we had many templates to update for different types of phase ones. and different types of clients. So there was that. And one thing that gets forgotten a lot is you also have to update your contracts and proposals, because the scope of work has changed, the terminology has changed. There might be contract provisions and things that you have now brought into your practice and want to make active periodically. So I think it's important also that your templates, be they reports, contracts, or proposals, all basically say the same thing. That's a very important thing down the road and to help make a successful project. The final thing I think I focused on most was the potential changes to workflow, costs associated with it, if there were some, timing issues, how fast was this going to take, and was there any significant things to think about there? And example would be like doing additional historical research. If that was something that the new standard pointed out and emphasized, then that was something I would have to make sure operationally we were prepared to do, and to do it well.
Clearly, there are a lot of steps involved, Alan, in transitioning over. Let's just shift direction here. If you were sitting in front of an EP today at a firm who was waiting until the 13 standard is no longer recognized by EPA, which, as I said in my intro, could be as far into the future as next February 13th. What are you saying to them about the implications of waiting to fully commit? And, really, how long can I keep calling a November 2021 standard new?
Here's my thought on that. Assuming you are prepared, I'm talking to the EP right now. Assuming you are prepared, I strongly suggest you make the transition as soon as possible at this point to avoid some potentially huge risks to your business. For all the things that need to be done, keep in mind that while it's certainly legal and okay to use 13, and so there is this allowable grandfathering period from the EPA to help people adjust and to make the decisions that are best for them, because this is a voluntary business after all. Your clients might not even care, or some of them might not. But think about what happens if something goes wrong at this point with the report. Maybe a mistake is made, there's an oversight, or there's a dispute between the parties to the transaction over a finding and conclusion. Even something you might think is totally beyond your control, but if your client is unhappy and suffers a significant financial setback to a deal, then you may find yourself and your company in a very difficult position at this point if you're using 13. When things like this happen, it's often too late to go back and fix it. And if there's an arbitration or a lawsuit, every prior choice that you made will be examined. And not just for that report, but also whether or not you trained your team to properly use the industry standard, which is now the best practice, E1527-21. It's a very steep uphill battle to argue at this point that it was not, didn't have enough time, or weren't there weren't proper education materials or things like that to prepare yourself. In worst case, if there's an error or omission and related to a failure to follow the updated practice in 21, you'll be in a very hard to defend position, regardless of all the things that you might have done right per 13. You will also be asked questions as to whether you suggested the 21 scope to your client and why you didn't, and it goes on and on. So there's just a lot of compelling reasons there. So my conclusion, and what I would tell them is, if you're all set with 21, then that's great. Go for it, use it, don't look back. If not, please let us help you get started now, because we have articles, webinars, educational resources, a 21 optimized parcel ESA report template, and we have designed products like our new 1980 Lean Search product that will help you comply with 21 in a cost-effective way. So if you have any questions, contact your representative and or me. We're happy to help.
Thanks, Alan. So when we did the last survey in September, when only 28% were using it exclusively, it'll be interesting to see how that percentage rises over the coming year as we reach back out to EPs. So thank you for being here and sharing your insights into how complex it is for firms to transition over, and the implications of being an early adopter versus waiting.